talking to two groups of people here today, really. First of all, drummers, but I also have a lot to say to worship leaders and worship band players, so technicians and pastors. So please feel free, if you're a drummer, to take what I say, and run with it if you want to. But if you're a worship leader or if you have a worship leader, you're welcome to quote me to them, okay? That you want to talk to, or pastor. Rick did an awesome job, and it was great to hear him speak. There he is now. You were just here a minute ago.
Well, I get around.
You get around. All right. Great to listen to. Rick is a super nice guy. I'm not half as nice as him, so I'm going to say things a little more straightforward the way I see it. Again, just like Rick said in his talking, my talking has also got a lot to do with my personal opinion, okay? So take it for what it's worth. If you're allowed to disagree with me, just don't tell me that you disagree. I don't want to know, all right? But you're allowed to know, have your own opinions on all these things. So, but just want to talk about the modern worship environment that we're in right now. Now, just to give you a little bit of background about who I am and where I come from as well, just so you know, I'm a pastor's kid as well. So I'm 42 now. I spent 42 years of my life in the church. My mom is a classically trained pianist, and my dad was a musician as well, predominantly trumpet, played for the Army when he was a young man. But they are great musicians. My dad was a pastor, though, so I grew up in church and seen a lot of it. Been in church for a long time, like I said, 42 years at least. Growing up, listened to predominantly Christian music, predominantly not very drum-driven Christian music, because, as you know, back in the day, that wasn't such a popular thing. My dad loved Southern gospel, though, so got into that as well. But in my teen years, rebelled definitely and got into some really heavy metal stuff. Again, preferring the Christian stuff over the non-Christian stuff, so I listened to all of it. Petra, Stryper, Tourniquet, Mortification, all those bands, if you know them, I like them all. So yes, from a drummer's perspective, I understand what it is to play blast beats, and I like to do that. I enjoy some heavy music. I like some heavy drumming. But there are also a lot of secular artists that I really do like. Amongst others, The Police, really, I got into as a young man and really enjoyed The Police a lot. Love Stuart Copeland's sound. So yes, I like a tight snare. I can't stand a down-tuned snare at all. So there we go with that. Yes, also, obviously, by the way, I forgot to mention, I was born and raised in South Africa. So yes, I love Dave Matthews Band. And yeah, so I love some good technical drumming. I like all kinds of music. I am also a guitar player. That's what I would consider my first instrument, guitar player and worship leader. I got into guitar playing, again, thinking more metal than anything else, but ended up with a teacher who was a phenomenal jazz guitar player, and he really got me to fall in love with jazz. I have a sister who's a piano player, and she went to college for jazz as well and has a master's degree in jazz piano. So her and her husband also got me really progressed that love for jazz music. So I have a very diverse and broad range of music that I love. My wife is absolutely mad about gospel music. She loves gospel, so I like gospel too. I've learned to love it very much. And she's a huge Motown fan as well. Motown and Stax. So can't get enough of that stuff. It's good stuff. So all of that gives you just a little bit of background of where I come from and my thinking, maybe. I don't know. I hope that helps for you to see what the things I say. But in the modern worship environment there's a lot to be said about it. First of all, what is it? Well, it's church music. So what does church music look like? Well, it can look like anything really, honestly, but it has one purpose and one purpose only at the end, which is glorifying God. And Rick said that too. So number one, and as drummers, we need to remember that. Our first and only perspective is at the end of the day, we're playing for the Lord. We're playing for God. We're playing both to Him and at Him. He's listening. He's there. He's present. The Word of God actually says, the Bible says that God dances when His people worship Him. So if you think about that, that is powerful stuff. God actually gets up off of his throne and dances when his children worship him with pure hearts. And as a drummer, that's part of what we are to be doing. Yes, we should be engaged intellectually in the music that we're playing. You can't just zone out completely. That's not the right thing to do. You have a job to do, and that's your responsibility. But you're doing it for the Lord. And as a musician, drummer or not, my perspective has always been, and I've always tried to make this clear to the people I work with and to other worship leaders too. They need to remember, and we need to always remember, when we're playing in a church, what we're doing on a Sunday morning is not only playing for an audience, and we are doing that. We are playing for a bunch of people in church, but we are literally playing to the God of the universe. Now, if you think about that, that's heavy stuff. Yes, God is with us every day, and that's good to know too. We got to keep that in our mind as well. God is our friend. Jesus is our friend. He also calls us his brother. He says he was the firstborn of many brothers when he rose from the dead. He is our brother, or views us as his brothers, his adopted brothers, right? But and sisters. But having said that too, we need to come to that perspective that what would we do if we knew the president was going to be in church on Sunday? If you knew that the country's president or former president, whatever, is going to show up at your church on Sunday, how would you approach the worship music as far as from a professional perspective, from a technical perspective? You'd play your best, right? That's just what it's going to come down to at the end of the day, is what I'm saying. You're going to bring your best. You're going to take it serious. Or if you don't want to play for the American government at all, then let's say the Queen of England or one of the princes were to come. Same thing, you know? If you knew Prince Henry was going to be in church on Sunday, what would your perspective be? You'd probably be a little bit more reverent. You'd probably be a little bit more nervous, like there's some big shots in the place right now, and I'm going to play to them. Or even more relatable, who is your absolute favorite musical hero who for you personally? You know, maybe for Rick it would be Ringo. How would Rick play on a Sunday morning if he knew Ringo Starr was going to sit in the audience on a Sunday morning? What would his perspective be, and how would he take that? And I think that's very important that we realize as musicians and as drummers that when we're playing somebody, not just greater, but the one who actually made Ringo Starr, the one who gave him every ounce of talent that he has, that guy is in our presence on a Sunday morning. Well, he's always in our presence. But when we play, we're playing to him, the God who created music itself. All of it. He owns it. And yes, if anybody says they're a drummer, the drums are evil, you should just smack them in the face, seriously. Because they're not. It's an instrument made to glorify God, made by human hands. But instruments are not evil. They're like bricks, right? You can take a brick and you can build a house, or you can throw it through somebody's window. Do with it whatever you will. It's just a thing. Music is just a thing, but it's something, or I should rather say the instrument is just a thing, but music, the ability to create rhythm and texture and emotion into a sound, that's something that's God-given. That's holy and pure and wonderful, and God blessed us with that. Now, you can pervert it if you want to, but I hope you don't. But with that perspective, we should always come. When we go to worship, when we step into that environment, we should do it that attitude. Always, knowing that we are worshiping God, and that's foremost and that's most important. Secondly, there's a lot of different churches. Now, I don't play in a church like LCBC. I'm the worship director at a church in Ephrata, a smaller church. You know, LCBC, we were looking at an average of 20,000 people showing up, right? The church I play at, we're looking at an average of around 30 to 40 people showing up for a contemporary service. So it's a lot different. And that is the case for many people, too. As many churches as we have, how many are as big as LCBC? I don't know, maybe about 5 different churches in our area or mega churches like that. How many smaller churches are there? I don't know, but probably about 300 or 400. So I know there's a lot of smaller churches, and you're playing in a smaller environment. Now, having said that, big church and big production is fun and can be fun. But when you're in a small church, you can't be big production. There's a difference, and you need to be okay with that, okay? So as a drummer, well, let's address big churches first of all. I don't like click tracks. Now, I've played in a church before where I was the drummer and been asked to play with the click track in my ears and the whole 9 yards, okay? So I understand what that is like. I don't like it. And I'll quickly say this about that. I love organic communication in music. I love that. I hate shields. We don't have a shield at our church, even though Adam is drumming for us. And yes, he has a heavy hand sometimes too. Still, we can do it without a shield. And I'm going to get back to that in just a minute. But I don't like shields. I don't like click tracks. I don't like being cut off from people like that. It's very hard to communicate. Nobody can turn around and tell you we're playing the song or, there's no communication in those environments for me. All right. Now, again, if you love it, that's okay. You can love it. But I would strongly suggest that you reconsider as worship leaders how much you lean on that technology, and be careful with that. It's all right to take the click track away sometimes. I was at a church in Florida where I was the worship leader, and we were across the street from a big high school. And the high school in the area was one of the best marching band high schools in the area. They had won a bunch of competitions. They were really well known. And we practiced on a Thursday night, and their Thursday night was their band practice too, happened to be. And it would be awesome because every time I'd come into the parking lot on a Thursday night for rehearsal at church, they'd be rehearsing out in the football field, and their director had a click track playing through the sound system of the football field. I mean, just blasting. It was so loud, and it would just travel forever. And the whole time that clicker would go, he would not turn that thing off either. I don't know if I don't know, maybe he only had one time to turn it off or something. I don't know what the deal was, but he turned that thing on, and he would change the tempo on it, but that thing stayed on all night. And they would play, and he'd tell them to stop, and I could hear him over the loudspeaker, and he'd give direction and tell them what to do. But, man, he wouldn't turn the clicker off. The clicker would be right there, and he'd just talk to them and tell them, and you guys need to straighten out and do it. All right, here we go again. 1, 2, 3. And that clicker was just the whole time. It was insane. But the awesome thing about it was the funny thing about it was that on Friday night when they had their football games and the band would come out and play, or if you ever saw them in their competitions, you know what was really missing? Well, it wasn't missing at all. What was lovely to not hear was a click track. There was no click track. They didn't play to a click track. A click track or metronome is a practicing tool, in my opinion. So to all the worship leaders who are getting offended now, call Adam and talk to him about it. But here's the thing. Click tracks don't belong in a working band when they're playing, in my opinion. All right? Click tracks are for practicing. Now, drummers, do you need to practice to a click track? Definitely. There's no better thing you can do. Now, there's a saying, and I want to make this very clear. My brother-in-law is also a music instructor, and he always says there's a saying that's very horribly flawed, and we all believe it, and it's called practice is perfect. And that's a horrible, horrible lie. That's not the truth, okay? Practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Only if you practice being perfect will you be perfect, okay? Practice, a better saying is practice makes permanent, okay? This is a very important concept to grab. Practice makes permanent. What you practice is what will become permanent to you. Or another way of saying it would be it becomes automatic. What you practice becomes automatic. So if you practice bad stuff, you're going to automatically play bad stuff. That's what's going to happen. So you need a good instructor, all right, to point out your mistakes in your practicing. Say you're practicing that wrong. You're using the wrong technique. You're not doing this right. Having somebody else help you in that way is very key. All right. So yes, that's a plug for Rick. He teaches here as well. So make sure, all right, make sure you take lessons if you don't. But practicing to a click is very powerful too. If you practice to a click as a drummer, you will become steady. If you have a steady meter, then you can play with a band without a click, and it would work. And the problem that I fear is that too many drummers don't know how to play to keep a beat steady. That's sad. That's your job, literally. So if you can't keep the beat steady, that's sad. Practice with a click. Now, if you can talk your worship leader into getting rid of the click, that would be wonderful. All right, but that's not the objective here. For me, speaking to other worship leaders specifically, drop the click, man. Let the people play. All right. So also, as far as that is concerned, you need to practice everything, dynamics. Drums is such an incredibly dynamic instrument, which is wonderful. It can take a song from almost nothing and build it into this massive thing. And without drums, it's just so hard to create that feeling. There are some songs too, especially now in the modern worship environment that we're in. The guys who are writing songs with the mindset of they're writing for a rock band, a pop rock band, basically. That's what you're listening to, or a funk band, if you want to call it that, a rock funk band, whatever. The gospel scene, the Christian music scene is very pop, rock and roll, gospel oriented. That's the way we've gone. Most churches no longer do the classical music thing. Some still do, but that's old school. The new stuff is all rock driven. So having said that, yes, it's drums driven, okay? And there's a lot of energy in the drums that you can play. But energy does not equate to loudness. Being loud does not mean you're playing energetic. And so drummers, again, a very important thing to learn to control is your volume. That is why churches started using shields. That's the predominant reason, is volume control. And it's sad because whose fault is that? Drummers. Who hates drum shields the most? Drummers. Why? Because it cuts you off. Not because you can't be heard. Believe me, you can be heard anyway. I hate drum shields. And we'll talk about that really fast. I found at one point, working with a church where I came into, I was hired as a worship pastor. I had played in drum shields before, being the drummer for churches in the drum shield, and I hated it. I can't communicate with the band. I can't communicate with anybody. I felt cut off from this congregation. So first of all, from that perspective, I hated it. But coming into a position where I was leading the church, I found that no matter what we did, the drums sounded horrible. One of the reasons was that fact that our guy was sitting in the drum booth wailing away with every ounce of strength that he had. And the drum booth was not stopping the volume. It was coming through. The problem was now it sounded like he was playing in the room next door. And why is that? Because he literally was. He's in the room next door. There's a door between us and glass. And so I had all this mud coming through onto the stage and into the sanctuary that we literally could not control the sound. And I had arguments with the sound men. What's going on here? Why can't you guys clean this up? And they said, because by the time I clean it up, we are running at such a high decibel level. We're running over 100 dBs, on consistent, not peaks. We can't control this. That's when it starts sounding good, because that's when I finally get the speakers to pump out some of the brightness to overwhelm the mud. So I said, well, what's the fix here? And nobody knew what the fix was. So I said, we're taking the drum shield down. I'm sick of it. Take it down. And to the drummer, play softer. Now, that's a harsh thing to say to a drummer. But he did, because he was an incredibly skilled musician and could. And I just asked him, can you just drop the decibel level a little bit? We took the drum shield away completely, and it sounded incredible. It was all of a sudden beautiful because we could hear the drums. Yes, the kick and the snare was still going through the system, but we didn't have to mic the whole thing up. We had kick and snare coming through the system, a lot of energy on the subs with the kick, but the drums were fine enough, the cymbals carried well enough, and everything else could be brought down. And that's something I want to, again, challenge worship leaders with. Why do you have your guy in a booth? Really, think about it very clearly. If you think about it, too, and this is the weird thing, nowhere in the secular world does this happen. Drum booth is almost exclusively a church thing. Only churches use shields. Like, nobody else ever uses them. There's a thing that is becoming popular now, and they're cymbal shields, and I do advise them. They're great. We haven't done that yet, and I don't know if that we will, but they are great because they just sit over the cymbal, and it does cut the harshness of the cymbal out by deflecting it. The problem is the deflection, and again, going back to the whole booth thing, the deflection of a drummer, especially when he's playing with all his strength inside the booth because he feels like he can, because he's in a booth, right? So he can play hard. So a drummer plays hard in a booth. The deflection from, if you have mics set up everywhere, the deflection from the shield actually picks up in the mics. And a lot of sound men, especially ones that haven't gone through enough of experience yet, won't know this. They don't understand why they're getting they can blame the drum sound, and they'll say the drum sounds like horrible coming through through the microphones, and it's the drum's fault. It's not the drum's fault, it's the deflection that's coming off of the shields. Take the shields away, and the drums actually do sound better. You don't have to down-tune the snare. You can actually leave it nice and sharp, and it cuts through, and it's nice. So I want to challenge that always. And if you're a drummer, in a very loving and nice way, you can quote me to your worship leader. Now, having said that, you don't do it on a Sunday morning. You don't get there and start tearing down the cage and say, hey, the other guy said we should. Okay, that's how you get fired. And if you get fired for that, you should have gotten fired. That's right, because that's not what I told you to do. But what you do is you take your worship leader or director or pastor out for a cup of coffee on midweek or on a Saturday or after church on a Sunday and say, listen, can we talk a little bit? And he's going to go, oh, Lord, here comes the trouble. And he's sort of right, but that's okay. But you say, listen, I enjoy playing with y'all. I love playing worship for the Lord. I want to keep doing this, and I will do it however you want me to do it. However, can we maybe just discuss a couple of thoughts? And then you can start bringing up the argument that why do we use things that nobody in the secular world uses? Why do we play in a way that we cannot communicate with each other? How can we move beyond this? And if you approach the worship leader with the right attitude, it's amazing how receptive they could be. Again, with love. And if he says at the end of the day, I appreciate all your opinions, but with the way we're doing is the way we're doing it, deal with it, then you know what? I'm sorry to say, guys, you have one of two choices. Either A, deal with it, or B, quit. And so if you're not going to deal with it in a good attitude, then please do just quit, because nobody needs a guy making trouble on a worship team. All right, so if you're going to make trouble, then just leave, okay? Find yourself a rock band to play in and do that. Or if you have a great attitude, it's amazing what sometimes happens. A lot of times it's not forever. A worship leader might say that. And a lot of times it usually isn't forever, because usually sooner or later, whether their perspective is wrong, they'll come around, especially if they have a soft heart. And most worship leaders do have soft hearts, believe me, I know them. All right, they have a heart for what matters, and they come around. And if you're right, they'll come around. And if you're wrong, well, I hope that eventually you'll come around too, right? They'll help you come around. And so having that attitude always is we're working together for the glory of God. Always have that attitude. But within that, not on a Sunday morning, not with a rotten attitude, not calling up the pastor or the worship leader and saying, I got a bone to pick with you. And even worse, not talking to the other musicians about how they're doing it wrong. Okay? That's not what I'm saying. If you're a drummer and you don't like the booth, don't complain to the bass player about the booth. What's the bass player going to do? I mean, come on. Don't start that. Don't grumble, right? Because remember, that's what happened to the Israelites and how Jesus hated that, or not Jesus, how God hated that when they were in the desert. Remember what he did to them? He made the ground open up and have them for lunch. So don't grumble. If you got a problem, address it with the worship leader, okay? Speak to the worship leader himself with a great attitude, with humbleness in your own heart. And check your attitude again, too. It's always important to check our own attitude, like Rick kind of said. You know, before you go into it, are you doing this because you want the music to sound great? Are you doing this because you want the worship experience for the congregation to be great and draw them in? Or are you going at this because, well, you want to be the rock drummer that just bashes away with a nice open stage in front of you? Okay, that shouldn't be your attitude. Now, of course, that is also what you love. I get that. So removing that from your own heart completely is impossible. But I'm saying, what is the driving force? Is the driving force because you want to make it great? And if that's not the driving force why you're doing something, then the way to fix that is in prayer, okay, with God. Talk to God a little bit about that. Again, I'm not asking you at that point to quit the team, all right? I've been on as the worship leader. I've had a bad attitude. And bad attitude doesn't mean now it's time for you to quit the team, okay? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying then take the time and spend some time with God and say, God, fix my attitude. And you know what? God is faithful. He will. He'll get you there. He'll turn your heart around again. But those are really important things to understand. Now, having said that, going to a smaller church, a lot of times they want the cages up too for the small. Again, here's a tip. Lightly and politely ask the worship leader to say, let's take the cages down for a Sunday. And I'll play soft. And then you really play soft so that you can show him that you can do it. And let's not see if it doesn't sound better. If I work with you as a musician, if I'm being the musician that I am, not just the drummer Dave Grohl who smacks the drums till they bleed, but just lightly and from a good perspective, come in and play. Can we not try this? Can we see what that sounds like? Or even if not for a Sunday, can we do it for a Wednesday night practice, Tuesday night practice, whenever your practice is? What about, can we try it for one practice? Can I show you what it would sound like? Because a lot of worship leaders, I'm going to tell you the truth now, guys, too. A lot of worship leaders do what CCM Magazine tells them to, or Worship Together Magazine, if you go to all those sites. And then those sites, a lot of times, that's what everybody else, like I said, Matt Redman or Jesus Culture or Hillsong, these guys are doing these things. And a lot of worship leaders follow suit because that's what they see. That's not right or wrong necessarily. It's just what they see. And so we all want to be like that. Now, a lot of churches, too, and again, I want to encourage you guys this. I'm not a copier. I don't like copying. I believe that if we want Hillsong to play, we cannot afford them to come to our church. So the next best thing is then to, well, play the tracks. I'd rather play the tracks than copy them exactly. Because what's the purpose of getting people involved in that? As a musician, and especially in church, smaller churches too, you don't have the production that Hillsong has. We don't have 4 acoustic guitar players, 3 electric guitar players, a keyboard player, a piano player, and another synth guy, a drummer and a percussionist, and then loops on top of that to all fill out the sound the way they do, okay? So you can't play what they play. You can't play it like them. Now, I strongly suggest, and I've always told this to my students as well that I used to teach a long time ago, don't start changing things until you can do what they do, okay? So as a drummer, you need to research their drums technique and learn to play what they're playing, okay? If you can't play Oceans, then the way that they have it on the recording, then you shouldn't tell them how to change it, okay? So what I'm saying is learn the part. But after that, you can't always play that part either in the song, in a church, depending on how things go in the church. You know, as a guitar player, I oftentimes want to play Love the Lick that's on that song, and I want to play that. But considering the fact that we're a 4-piece band, I'm the guitar player, we have 1 piano player, a bass player, and a drummer. I can't play that lick because then nobody is holding down the chord structure or whatever. So we got to learn how to adapt the music, and that's fine, adapt the music. And if you have to adapt it to not play like you're playing to a stadium, and this is actually rather important, you got to remember, these guys, Hillsong is playing literally to stadiums. Their church is a stadium, and they play to stadiums. So they play a different way than we have to play. When we play in a smaller church, especially when there's 30 or 40 people sitting in front of you, you can't play like you're playing in a stadium. So you got to think about that. You got to play like you're playing in a small coffee club or jazz club or something like that. Now, I'm not saying you have to play jazz. I'm just saying you have to play with that mentality. You have to play with the mentality that there's only 30 people in front of you. And yes, if you put every ounce of energy that you have in your body into smacking the cymbal, it's going to hurt somebody's ears. It just will. So don't do that. Think about what you're doing. Think about the environment that you're playing. And that's another musical term that if you've been around long enough at all, you've heard people say this. But there is so much power in this. You've got to grab a hold of this. You've got to play to the room, right? We've all heard that saying, play to the room. You need to learn how to play to the room. And if you don't know how to play to the room, then get an instructor. Get somebody who can teach you how to play to a room. You need to learn how to do that. Again, why? Because this is not a rock show. This is you leading people into God's presence and making them aware of how awesome He is. Now, with music, and that's just such a wonderful thing. With music, we have such an incredible power to do that. Make people aware of how wonderful God is. That in a way that defies logic. You know, it's not an argument. At that point, it's something that they experience here, and that's wonderful. And we can do that. We can help them to come to that place, but we really have to do it with humble hearts and learning how to do that in the room. And in a stadium, it's a different situation. In a stadium, yes, we can rock out, but in a smaller room, we got to learn how to project energy without volume. Okay, and so there's a lot in that, and I wish I could give you some demos right now as to show you how to do that. We don't have the time nor the setup to do that. But I do want to ask you and invite you to find an instructor, if you don't have one, to teach you how to do that. And to worship leaders, help your drummers get there. If your drummer doesn't know how to do that, Make sure he has a teacher. If he doesn't have a teacher, get him a teacher. And you know what? Have the church pay for it. I mean, what does a lesson cost here a week? 40 bucks? 25 bucks. 25 bucks. I understand churches have budgets. Our church has a budget too, believe me, I know. But $25 a week, I mean, if your church honestly doesn't have that budget, then I think you know someone as a worship leader. I'm talking to worship leaders now. As a worship leader, you know someone in your church who can afford to pay $25 a week for your drummer to get a lesson, right? And if you approach that person with the right attitude, saying, we're looking to elevate the worship, can I maybe ask you now, as a drummer, I would strongly advise you not to ask for yourself for 4 lessons from somebody else, okay? Because then it seems like you're begging. but you know, you don't want to do that. But worship leaders, if your drummer is hurting in his abilities, you need to help him develop, okay? Drummers, if your worship leader is not going to help you, or you can approach your worship leader and say, I need help. And or if you can in any way, shape, or form, just ignore that and just do it yourself. Get yourself a teacher. $25 a week. Sometimes it's harder than it's not. I understand that. But for most of the time, it's not that hard. So get yourself an instructor. Get somebody to help you. One of my favorite worship leaders and an incredible guy is a guy by the name of Paul Balash. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. Writes a lot of the songs that we do in worship. I know if I started singing songs, you'd recognize them, but I'm not going to do that. He's an incredible writer, incredible worship leader. Love his music, and I love his attitude. He's got one of the most beautiful hearts in the world. I've been to some of his seminars, and I really enjoy his seminars. However, he says something incredibly scary, shocking when it comes to drums. He has multiple times that I've heard him say, talking to worship leaders, what do you look for in a drummer, or how, you know, what should you get as a drummer? And his first advice always is just don't. So that's his attitude, you know, don't get a drummer. You don't need that trouble. And it's really sad, and I'll tell you why I think it's sad. Because why is his attitude that? And I'll tell you why his attitude is that. It's because we as drummers have done that to ourselves. We've been stubborn. We've walked in and played as hard as we can. We've told them that we'll show them how to rock out. And what do you have left then? What do you expect when people then go, just don't bother. Just don't bother. So it's really up to us as drummers to change that. We have to change that mentality with great attitude, with servant attitude, and with the ability to be musical. And that's another thing that blows my mind. The foundation of music is drums. And yet when you talk to guitar players and worship leaders, they almost view drums as like a subcategory, not musician. You know? It's like we have musicians and we have a drummer, and there's so many jokes about that too. But it's not. It's exactly the opposite. Honestly, that's where it starts. Foundationally, music is rhythm. Pitch means very little without a beat, you know? There's lots of noises, but when you put a beat to it, it becomes music. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I can groove to it. I feel that, you know? When you can start feeling it. So drummers, you guys are musicians. Let's start there. I'm a musician as a drummer, and I take that very serious. But we need to, as drummers, start taking that very serious too. We're musicians, not just guys who beat on stuff, not just girls who beat on stuff. But we are musicians, and we need to approach it in that way. And that's what we're doing. The modern worship environment is really, honestly, not that different at all from the rock environment, from the pop environment, from the music environment in the world. It's actually, to tell you the truth, almost identical nowadays. Musically, we're playing the exact same stuff. We're playing exactly the same style of music. We're playing the exact same way that the world plays. So the worship environment is not that much different from the secular environment. So my advice to you is don't make it any different, okay? Play with the same attitude of professionalism. Play with the same heart of passion for the instrument and the music. But keep one thing center, and that's that this is to the glory of God at the end. And if I draw other people in to glorify God, that's just more of us all doing what he deserves. So if you can keep doing that, that's the greatest and most important thing to grab a hold of, in my opinion. Grab a hold of those two things. First and foremost, for God, with everything that I have. And secondly, don't get so hung up on the fact that it's church. It's music, okay? And whether we play in the church or we play outside of the church, again, my opinion is it's all to the glory of God, to the best of my ability. So always keep that in attitude, and things could go pretty good. But having said that, I know I'm close to out of time, if not way past. So can we go ahead and see if there's any questions you have for me? I'll try to answer them, though I might not be able to. Somebody else might.